The bobcat kept circling the backyard pool so relentlessly that by the third pass, babysitter Maren Cole stopped dismissing it as a strange suburban wildlife sighting and started watching where it kept stopping near the deep-end cover. And when she finally stepped closer and saw the faint movement trapped beneath the sagging blue tarp, she understood with a cold, breathless jolt that the wildcat had not wandered into the yard by accident. It had stayed there until someone noticed a child was in trouble. The house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Pine Ridge Estates, one of those newer neighborhoods built where woods had been pushed back in stages over the last decade. The lots were generous by suburban standards, with privacy fences, swing sets, landscaped patios, and enough surviving tree line beyond the backyards that deer still showed up at dusk, and raccoons treated trash nights like a festival. People in Pine Ridge liked to think they lived close to nature because they could hear owls in the winter and sometimes saw foxes on the community trail, but most of them still reacted to anything wild in the yard with the same startled disbelief, especially cats with tufted ears and spotted coats. Maren Cole had been babysitting in the neighborhood since high school. At 21, she was a junior in nursing school, steady-handed and practical, the kind of person parents trusted because she paid attention and did not spend the evening glued to her phone. She had grown up 2 towns over, the oldest of 4 siblings, and by the time she was 15, she could heat a bottle, calm a tantrum, find a missing shoe, and identify the exact silence that meant a child was being suspicious in another room. She worked mostly for families she knew by reputation, and the Ellisons, who lived in the house with the pool, were among her regulars. That Friday evening, she arrived just before 6 to watch 7-year-old Lily and her 4-year-old brother Ben while their parents attended a work dinner in the city. It was supposed to be routine: pizza, a movie, board games, baths, bedtime. Mrs. Ellison gave the same instructions she always did. Emergency numbers on the fridge. Lily had a mild peanut allergy. Ben would absolutely try to negotiate for extra screen time, and please keep the sliding door locked, because the pool company had only partially winterized the cover after a recent windstorm. The pool itself sat behind the house with a mesh safety fence around it, but the Ellisons had removed one section temporarily during landscaping and were waiting on a replacement latch. Until then, the heavy winter cover was supposed to be the main barrier, stretched tight over the water and anchored to the deck. "Kids know they're not allowed anywhere near it," Mr. Ellison said, grabbing his keys. "Especially Ben." Maren nodded. "Got it." The first 2 hours went exactly as planned. They ate pizza at the kitchen island. Lily explained in great detail why her school's turtle mascot looked more like a potato, and Ben insisted on wearing a superhero cape over his pajamas while building a block garage for toy dinosaurs. By 8:30, Maren had them upstairs for baths, teeth, and stories. A light rain had moved through at dusk, tapping on the windows and leaving the backyard slick and reflective under the motion lights. The wind picked up later, rattling the deck furniture and making the loose chimes on the neighbor's porch sing in short, eerie bursts. Lily fell asleep first, one hand tucked under her cheek, a paperback open across her blanket. Ben did not. Ben declared he was not sleepy at all, and then fell asleep halfway through a second story, sprawled diagonally across his bed with one sock on and one sock missing. Maren eased the book from his hand, turned on the hallway nightlight, and went downstairs around 9:40 to clean up the kitchen and text Lily's mom a quick update. Both asleep. All good. The house settled into that late evening hush familiar to anyone who has watched children. Dishwasher hum, fridge cycling, the occasional creak from upstairs, wind in the trees. Maren made tea, reviewed flashcards for an exam, and checked the baby monitor app the Ellisons used mostly to keep tabs on the kids' rooms. Around 10:15, she heard something outside. At first, she thought it was the wind dragging a branch across the fence. Then she heard it again. A low, rough sound, almost like a cough sharpened into a rasp. She glanced toward the dark backyard through the kitchen windows and saw movement near the pool. A bobcat. It was larger than she expected. Lean, long-legged, pale brown with dark markings and black ear tufts visible in the spill of the deck light. It moved along the edge of the pool in a tight arc, stopped at the deep end, looked down at the cover, then paced back toward the shallow end before circling again. It wasn't crossing the yard. It wasn't trying to climb the fence. It was fixated on the pool. Maren stood frozen with her mug in both hands. Her first thought was immediate and useless. There's a wildcat in the backyard. Her second thought was stranger. Why is it staying? She set the mug down slowly and stepped closer to the glass. The bobcat stopped and looked toward the house. For one tense second, she expected it to bolt. Instead, it turned back to the pool cover, paced 2 steps, and made the rough, rasping sound again. "Okay," Maren whispered, heart thudding. "Nope. No, no, no." She did what most people would do first. She checked upstairs. Both kids were still in bed. Lily asleep. Ben sprawled and snoring softly. She exhaled, relieved and a little embarrassed at herself, and came back down to the kitchen. The bobcat was still there. It had moved closer to the deep end now, near a place where rainwater had pooled on top of the cover and formed a shallow sag. Maren remembered Mrs. Ellison mentioning the pool company needed to tighten one side after the windstorm. From the window she could see the cover dip unevenly near the ladder area, but nothing else obvious. No raccoon, no opossum, no branch caught under it. The bobcat circled again, faster this time, then stopped and stared hard at the sagging patch. Maren grabbed her phone and zoomed in through the glass, trying to record video because she was already imagining having to explain this later. On the phone screen, the cover looked darker at one section, rainwater trembling in small ripples. Ripples. She lowered the phone. The wind had eased. The trees were mostly still. The ripples moved again, very small, from underneath. Every muscle in her body went cold at once. Maren was through the kitchen and at the sliding door before she consciously decided to move. She unlocked it, stepped onto the wet deck, and shouted toward the pool, "Hey!" The bobcat sprang back several feet, but did not run. It paced toward the far side of the pool, eyes locked on Maren, and then the cover. Maren moved closer, pulse roaring in her ears. The deep-end cover sagged more than she'd realized, a sheet of wet blue vinyl with rainwater pooled over a depression near the edge. In the center of that depression, just visible in the deck light, something pale moved weakly beneath the material. A hand, small, pressing up once, then slipping. "No!" Maren dropped to her knees at the pool edge and lunged for the cover strap nearest the deep-end anchor. The winter cover was under tension and slick with rain, but this section had loosened where one spring looked partially detached. She yanked at the strap and felt it shift. "Maren?" A tiny muffled voice came from under the cover, barely audible over her own breathing and the slap of pooled water. "Ben!" she screamed. She didn't stop to think how he got there, didn't stop to wonder if Lily had woken too. She just moved. Ben must have gotten out of bed, come downstairs, and gone outside, maybe chasing his missing sock, a toy, a flashlight beam, anything, and stepped onto the compromised cover. Instead of holding him, it had dipped, trapping him in a pocket of water under the tarp near the deep end. If he slid farther, the cover could seal over him completely. "Maren!" he cried again, weaker. "I'm here! Don't move! Keep your face up!" Her nursing training and every babysitting instinct she had collided at once. Do not climb onto a failing cover. Distribute weight. Create an opening. Keep airway clear. Call 911. She snatched her phone from her hoodie pocket with shaking fingers and dialed emergency services on speaker while hauling at the nearest strap with both hands. 911. What's your emergency? I'm babysitting. Child trapped under a pool cover. He's conscious. Backyard pool. Deep end. Send help now. She rattled off the address as she dug her heels into the wet deck and pulled. The dispatcher's voice sharpened immediately. Do not go onto the cover. Can you reach the child? I can't see him clearly. He's under the cover pocket. I'm trying to open a side. The bobcat was on the far side of the pool, pacing hard, tail twitching, making that rough, rasping sound in short bursts. If Marin had not been in full panic mode, she might have found it impossible. As it was, the animal's presence barely registered as anything but one more urgent movement in a night gone wrong. The loose spring finally popped free with a metallic snap, and one corner of the cover slackened enough for Marin to drag it toward her. Rainwater spilled across the deck and into her lap. She clawed at the vinyl, pulling, slipping, pulling again until a gap opened near the coping stones. She saw Ben's face beneath the edge, wet hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide with terror, mouth just above water in a trapped air pocket. "Oh, God! Ben, look at me!" she shouted. "Breathe! I've got you!" He reached for her with one hand, but the cover sucked down again as the pooled water shifted. Marin flattened herself on the deck, hooked one arm through a ladder rail, and reached under with the other, stretching until her shoulders screamed. Her fingers brushed his pajama sleeve, slipped, then caught. "Hold my arm! Hold tight!" He latched on, sobbing. The dispatcher kept talking, voice steady and fast. "Good. Keep his head up if you can. Fire is on the way. Can you create more opening?" Marin looked around wildly. The deck furniture was strapped, but there was a long pool skimmer pole leaned near the fence. She released Ben only long enough to seize the pole and jam the tip under the cover edge, levering upward to keep the gap from sealing shut. With the pole bracing one side and her body anchoring the other, she reached in again and grabbed Ben under the armpit. "On three, Ben! Kick toward me! 1, 2, 3!" He kicked weakly. She pulled with everything she had. For one horrifying second she thought he was snagged. Then his body slid free from the water pocket and under the loosened edge, scraping across the coping and into her arms in a surge of cold water and vinyl. Marin fell backward onto the deck with Ben on top of her, both of them soaked and gasping. He was coughing hard, crying, and shivering violently. The dispatcher's voice came through the phone on the deck beside them. "Is he breathing?" "Yes, yes, he's breathing. Coughing. He's breathing." "Good. Move him away from the pool. Keep him warm. If he becomes sleepy or stops responding, tell me immediately." Marin dragged Ben several feet across the wet deck and wrapped herself around him until she could stand. Her own legs felt weak and rubbery. She looked once toward the far side of the pool. The bobcat had stopped pacing. It stood still in the yard, chest heaving, watching them. Sirens were already rising in the distance. Marin half-carried, half-dragged Ben inside through the sliding door, dripping water across the kitchen tile. She kicked the door shut behind them, grabbed towels from the laundry room, and stripped his soaked cape and pajama top while talking to him nonstop to keep him awake. "You stay with me, okay? Look at my face. Can you tell me what color your dinosaur toothbrush is?" "Green," he sobbed. "Good. Good job. What's your sister's name?" "Lily." "Exactly right." She wrapped him in 2 towels and a throw blanket and sat on the kitchen floor with him in her lap just as the first responders arrived. Engine company, EMS, and a sheriff's deputy, lights washing the windows red and blue. The paramedics took over fast, checking airway, breathing, oxygen saturation, skin temperature, and lung sounds, while Marin tried to answer questions through chattering teeth of her own. "How long was he under?" "I don't know. Minutes, maybe. He was in bed. I heard something outside." "Any loss of consciousness?" "He was talking when I got to him. Muffled. He coughed a lot." "Did he hit his head?" "I don't know. I don't think so." A firefighter and the deputy went to secure the pool area, and from the kitchen, Marin heard one of them say, "There's an animal out here," followed by the deputy's surprised, "Is that a bobcat?" Paramedic Jessa Martin glanced up from Ben and asked, "A what?" Marin looked toward the backyard, then back at Ben, and burst into shaky, incredulous tears. "That's why I checked the pool." Ben was stable enough to transport non-code, but urgently for evaluation, because near-drowning complications can be delayed. They loaded him into the ambulance with warmed blankets and oxygen, while one paramedic stayed beside him. Marin called the Ellisons with fingers that barely worked and somehow got the words out before Mrs. Ellison's breath caught in panic on the other end. "He's alive," Marin said first, because she knew that was the only phrase that mattered at the beginning. By the time Lily woke upstairs, confused, sleepy, asking why there were lights outside, the neighbor from 2 houses down had come over to stay with her until her parents returned. The sheriff's deputy, Mark Duval, took Marin's statement in the kitchen while firefighters tightened an emergency perimeter around the pool and documented the failed cover tension point. Mark was trying very hard to keep his face neutral and only mostly succeeding. "So, let me make sure I've got this straight," he said, pen hovering over his notepad. "You heard a sound outside, saw a bobcat circling the pool, noticed it repeatedly stopping near the deep-end cover, and that led you to check the cover and find the child trapped underneath." Marin hugged a dry blanket around her shoulders and stared at the table. "Yes," he cleared his throat. "And the bobcat stayed in the yard during the rescue?" "Yes." One firefighter stuck his head in from the deck door, helmet under his arm. "Deputy, cat's gone now." Just like that. No dramatic moment. No final stare. Gone. The Ellisons arrived at the hospital before midnight and stayed there the rest of the night while Ben was monitored for aspiration and hypothermia. He was frightened, exhausted, and had a bruised shin and scraped hands, but after imaging, observation, and respiratory checks, the doctors said the thing everyone needed to hear. He was going to be okay. Marin sat in a hard ER chair with wet shoes and a borrowed sweatshirt until nearly 3 a.m., giving her statement again to a second deputy and then to Child Protective Services, because any child found trapped in a pool incident triggered a standard review. No one accused her of negligence. In fact, every professional she spoke to said some version of, "You acted fast," but she still replayed the night in loops. Ben asleep, Ben downstairs, the unlocked sliding door, the ripples, that tiny hand under the cover. When the Ellisons finally came out to the waiting area after Ben was settled, Mrs. Ellison hugged her so hard she cried into Marin's shoulder. Mr. Ellison, who usually looked composed to the point of intimidating, had red eyes and could barely get out a full sentence. "You saved him." Marin shook her head automatically, then stopped. Because that wasn't the full truth. Not exactly. The next day, in daylight, the pool contractor and fire investigator found what had happened. One deep-end spring had partially failed after the windstorm, and 2 adjacent anchors had loosened in the wet concrete. The cover still looked secure from a distance, but near the ladder side it had enough slack to sag under a child's weight and trap water in a dangerous pocket. It was exactly the kind of hidden hazard safety warnings described and people underestimated. They also found small muddy paw prints on the deck and in the thin mulch bed near the fence line. Bobcat tracks, clear enough in the damp soil that even the skeptical contractor stared at them for a second before saying, "You don't see that every day." By morning, the story had spread through Pine Ridge Estates and then far beyond it, because stories involving children, pools, and wild animals travel fast. In some versions, the bobcat attacked the cover. In others, it howled at the back door or dragged toys across the deck. Marin corrected people whenever she had the energy. "No," she said, "it paced. It kept circling and staring at the same spot. That's what made me look." The State Wildlife Office sent an officer by the neighborhood that afternoon to remind residents not to feed or approach bobcats and to secure pets and trash. The officer was careful, science-minded, and unsurprised by unusual animal behavior around suburban edges. They investigate movement, sounds, water sources, she told the cluster of neighbors gathered near the mailbox kiosks. Sometimes they fixate on distressed prey or trapped animals. We can't assign human motives to it. Marin nodded. She understood that. She even agreed. But she also knew what she had seen in the deck light. The circling, the stopping, the repeated focus on the deep-end sag while the rest of the yard sat still. For weeks afterward, she had trouble sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pooled rainwater trembling on the cover and Ben's hand pressing up under the vinyl. She startled at wind rattling windows. In class, she drifted during lectures and then snapped back, embarrassed, when the professor called on her. The nursing advisor she trusted told her it was a normal stress response after an emergency, especially one involving a child. "Your body is still finishing the alarm," she said. What helped most, unexpectedly, was seeing Ben a few days later in daylight, wrapped in a blanket on the Ellisons' couch, pale but cheerful, and determined to tell the story himself. "I was going to show you my flashlight under the blanket fort," he announced solemnly to Marin, as if explaining a reasonable chain of events. "Then I went outside because I saw eyes." Marin's stomach tightened. "You saw the bobcat?" He nodded. "By the fence. I wanted to show him my cape." He looked down, suddenly quiet. "Then I stepped on the pool, and it got squishy." Mrs. Ellison, standing behind him with one hand over her mouth, looked like she might never let him out of arm's reach again. Ben brightened a second later and asked, "Did Spots come back?" "Spots?" Marin repeated. "The cat." Nobody had the energy to unpack that. Marin smiled weakly and said, "Not that I know of." The Ellisons replaced the entire pool cover system, reinstalled the safety fence latch, added high chimes to the sliding doors, and put child-proof top locks on every exterior exit. Mr. Ellison, humbled in the way near tragedy humbles people fast, told every neighbor on the street to inspect their pool covers that weekend, and offered to pay half for anyone who couldn't afford a service call. Several took him up on it. As for Marin, she kept babysitting, after a break, and only because the Ellisons insisted she had nothing to prove and everything to be proud of. The first night she returned to the house, she stood at the kitchen window for a long moment before the kids came downstairs, looking at the repaired pool cover stretched taut and safe under the patio lights. The yard looked ordinary. The woods beyond the fence rustled in the wind. Nothing moved. Later that evening, after Lily and Ben were asleep and the house was quiet again, she stepped onto the deck just long enough to take out the trash bag and latch the gate. Near the fence line, in the damp soil beside the hydrangeas, she saw a line of old paw prints, softened by weather, and nearly gone. She stood there in the cool night air, listening to the leaves and the distant hum of traffic beyond the neighborhood, and felt that same shiver of awe and humility she had felt only after the ambulance left. Not because she thought the world had turned magical in a backyard cul-de-sac, because danger had been hidden in plain sight under a blue tarp, while everyone inside assumed the night was under control, and because something wild, for reasons she would never be able to explain cleanly, had refused to leave the pool until the one person awake finally looked where it kept circling.